Hi everybody, Bob Huffman here with the BC Comix Show. Today we have Will Miller here. He's a local player, very talented, and we're going to talk about the new set Shadows over Innistrad and the effects that it might have on Modern. We've got the top 10 cards that you don't want to overlook when going into the Modern format coming up. Alright, so Will, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself here?
I'm Will Miller. I've been I'm a local player here at BC. Like to play Modern and Legacy mostly. Still play Standard and Draft whenever able to. But going to school at Oakland University for Mechanical Engineering, and really big fan of this set so far. It looks awesome.
Yeah, it does. I'm really excited. Well, thanks for sitting down with me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yep, we're going to have a good time here. So let's get right into it. Starting right off here, let's talk about the big monster in the room, when everybody's thinking about, Avacyn.
Now, Avacyn is getting a lot of hype lately, mostly for Standard applications, because she seems like she'll be a big pillar of that format. But she is getting a little overlooked for Modern, I think. She's a 5-drop, so she's obviously very expensive, but
makes sense.
Something that I personally really want to do is chord for Archangel Avacyn, so chording for a total of 8, 5 mana, and then making my creatures indestructible, and then sacrificing something to Viscera Seer to wrath my opponent's board. That's a really good combo in Malaria Company against a lot of the aggro decks that will still be there, even with the new unbannings. And I don't know if that's quite good enough, but she certainly could see play in a lot of other various Court of Calm decks as well, just as a really good chord target.
Yeah, now, I mean, that sounds fun and everything, but, I mean, is that realistic?
Chording for 5 happens a lot, more than you would think. I played Archangel Chord with Archangel Thune and Spike Feeder for a long time, and yeah, chord for 5 is very real, for sure. You play up to 8 mana dorks with Birds and Noble Hierarchs. You play Wall of Roots, which counts as 2 cards for, 2 mana for Court of Calling. It's very realistic. It could definitely happen. I've talked to a few other Malaria Company players who are potentially very excited about this as well.
Geeked and on board to do this chording for 8 as well.
And that may be a bit of a pipe dream. You may be right, but even if that's not exactly where she ends up, she could also see play just as again, a core target to counter board wipes, especially if these control decks gain traction. Just being able to chord for something that stops you from getting Supreme Verdicted or Anger of the Gods is really strong as well. Like, Dauntless Escort could fill that role before, but it was a bit inefficient if you didn't, stop the big Wrath or anything. And
right, she's just a powerhouse all by herself.
She's just good by herself, yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense.
And even in like a control deck, like blue-white sort of mid-rangey control deck, this card is pretty reasonable as just a good flash threat.
Yeah.
I know Chris has been talking about doing that a lot, and that seems like really good. You could just put her in combat and make sure your Wall of Roots, or Wall of Omens rather, and Kitchen Finks don't die, stuff like that, and just add to the clock a lot faster.
Yeah.
I think the green sort of chord strategy is where she fits a little better, but she has a lot of potential in Modern for sure, I think.
Okay, alright, sounds good. Well, look for that then, Avacyn in Modern. Next up, we're going to talk about a zombie card, Relentless Dead.
This card is just so sweet, and zombies got a lot of tools in this set for Modern, I think, and it could be a real thing. If you're looking for a grindy, graveyard, synergistic sort of deck that can pretty much never lose to more fair decks like Jund or control decks, like, this could definitely be a thing. This Relentless Dead is just a pretty efficient beater on its own as a 2/2 menace for 2, I think, and late game it's just never gonna die.
Yeah, I know I've always enjoyed playing zombies, both in Modern, Legacy, and when it was in Standard, and I saw this card and I instantly got excited. We were at Grand Prix Detroit and I was running around. hey guys, look at this zombie. This is awesome. I'm excited for the fact that my board can be rebuilt so easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's sick, and you can even use him to. You can use his second and third abilities, both, if he dies, to get back a zombie and get himself back to your hand.
Back to your hand at the same time. Yep.
That's just
a
huge
zombie
value.
that can block.
Yeah. Wow. So novel. Your burn matchup isn't quite as atrocious with this guy compared to like Bloodghast and Gravecrawler.
Yeah.
But it's just another good 2-drop for the zombie deck. In addition to Bloodghast, another really good recursive threat. And if Jund type decks or control decks become the new norm, especially with these new unbannings, you could see the zombie deck be a real player.
Yeah, yeah, and of course that's dependent on zombies being playable in Modern in the first place.
For sure, and
which currently before this they're not.
No, but there's one more tool that the deck gains that we'll talk about in a bit. Bit of foreshadowing here, but yeah, the card is quite good, and it could see zombies become a thing.
Yeah,
in large part because of it.
All right. Let's see here. We've got next up. We've got. Sticking on the theme of tribal, we've got Thalia's Lieutenant.
Absolutely, and another one that I think is going a little under the radar for Modern, but that's just because of some of the other incredible cards in the set, probably. There's already sort of a humans deck. I've seen Craig Wesco in particular brewing a banned humans collected company deck, which plays cards like Riders of Gavany and Champion of the Parish to take advantage of the human synergies, in addition to just really powerful cards like Noble Hierarch and Reflector Mage. And this thing fits right in and would be one of the best cards in that deck were it to become a real deck.
Fair enough. Reflector Mage in Modern?
Card is nuts. That card's really good in Modern. And like banned collected company decks without a humans tribal theme, with stuff like Knight of the Reliquary and Tarmogoyf, have already been putting up real results lately. Almost every top 8 for any paper Modern tournament has one of these banned collected company decks or something. Yeah, and no one's talking about it. It seems to be way under the radar, but it's putting up results. And Reflector Mage is a huge part of the reason why. Card is really good.
It definitely has held its own in standard.
Oh yeah.
So, if that's any indication that it could see some Modern play on a bigger scale, yeah, absolutely. And if it does, I can agree with you. I can see Thalia's Lieutenant and a humans theme getting in there.
Yeah.
Next up, we've got a rather controversial card. You like it or you hate it. It's Thing in the Ice.
Thing in the Ice is really hard to judge, and it's easy to see why it's so controversial, because there's not really been a card like it. Like, the most obvious comparisons have sort of been Tarmogoyf combined with a young Pyromancer Delver of Secrets card, because it's
a
just
Mongusli Delver Tarmo card.
It's a 2-drop that's huge if you get it to work, like Tarmogoyf, but it also needs you to play a lot of instant sorceries like Delver or Young Pyromancer. So I honestly don't know if this card is quite good enough. It's something that we'll see through the next few coming months. That's when we'll be able to know for sure whether the card's good enough. But it certainly has potential, and there's no doubt it's worth testing. Right? Like, it's
why not?
super powerful if you can get it all to work. It's just a matter of whether you can get it to work consistently. And in Modern specifically, I don't... replacing Young Pyromancer is very hard in that deck, but what you can do is there's sort of a teamer mid-range deck type thing that has been on the fringes, but there, with Tarmogoyf combined with, like lots of just disruptive spells, and similar to a Delver deck, even if it doesn't necessarily play Delver.
Even if it doesn't necessarily, okay.
Yeah.
So you think the direction might be not playing Delver and playing Thing in the Ice instead?
Yeah, which seems bad because it's a 2-drop, and it doesn't really replace Delver in the same way, but I just think Delver's a bad card in Modern, to be honest. And this might just be me. I've heard a few other people say that, but without...
Well, it's never really put up solid results, right?
It did when Treasure Cruise was legal, but that was because of Treasure Cruise. But it's... you just don't have the cantrips to set it up like you do in Legacy. You don't have Preordain, you don't have Ponder, which set it up, or Brainstorm obviously, which set it up really, really well. You just have Serum Visions, and then the other cantrips you have to play don't actually set up Delver, like Thought Scour or Taxi Pro.
So the thought process here is, if we can't set up a flip, we'll just force a flip through lots of instants and sorceries.
Right, Thing in the Ice in that deck will turn on more consistently than Delver. And you need Delver to turn on like right away, or it's just a bad card. It's a 1/1.
Whereas this one, if it turns on turn 5, you're still
probably going to win that game against a lot of decks. Yeah. Just the bouncing all creatures effect is just nuts. And it also means, I think it more replaces Tarmogoyf than anything, because you can just not play green now. You can just play blue-red and still have a giant 2-drop. So yeah, the card is super interesting, and more testing is needed to see if it truly gets there, but I would really not be surprised if it does. I think it's a really, really good card in the format.
All right, fair enough. Yeah. All right. Will it see play or not? Time will tell.
Absolutely.
Next up, we've got Invasive Surgery.
This is the card that is the most underrated, in my opinion, in the set, for Eternal formats, mostly Modern. Yeah. It's sort of weird to realize that we don't have Envelop in Modern, and Envelop is just this card, except for without Delirium. It's just counter target sorcery spell for 1 blue. And Envelop already sees Fringe play in Legacy. Not very often, but it does see Fringe play in sideboards to counter things like Show and Tell, Terminus, the powerhouse sorceries like that, Glimpse of Nature, Natural Order. And in Modern, there's also a lot of really problematic sorceries. There's Scapeshift, that's a really good one. Like Wraths, like if there's a blue-white Gifts deck that would play Wrath of God and Day of Judgment, that's a good one to get. Damnation. There's one that's escaping me right now that's also really prevalent in combo. Not Ad Nauseam. Oh, Living End. That's what it was. Yeah, countering Living End with this card is good. And even without the Delirium, like, the Delirium is super good if you get it off, but even without Delirium, Envelop is a reasonable card in Modern, in sideboards. And it's something that I think was sorely needed in Modern. Now, it's super format dependent and it may not see much play. It's certainly not as good as Dispel on average, I think, because just almost every deck has instants and only a few decks have sorceries. But having an Envelop type effect in Modern is super huge. And if you get to actually activate the Delirium on it, that will just kill a lot of decks. Like Slaughter Games-esque. Like Scapeshift suddenly, if it's blue, red, green Scapeshift at least, they suddenly can't win.
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty sick. So yeah, I think this card has a lot of potential in Modern and will probably see some amount of play in sideboards at some point, if not right now.
Fair enough. All right. Moving on, we've got another controversial card when we come to Modern.
Absolutely.
One that neither one of us is sure if it's good enough, but we both believe the potential is there, and that's Arlen Cord.
Yeah, Arlen is fighting for a lot of, or she has a lot of enemies as far as things that could take her spot. Like the most common comparison is obviously Huntmaster of the Fells. Exact same mana cost and does very similar things, kind of. But there's no doubting that the power level's certainly there. She's potentially could see play over Huntmaster in that one slot in Jund, or maybe in a more low to the ground, but not quite like burn red-green deck, like maybe like a big zoo deck you could see her. She's a bit on the fringes, right? Like if she sees any play in Modern, it's probably as a one-of, and in whatever deck she sees plays in, maybe 2. And she's not, like, she doesn't have any super, like, decks she very obviously fits into, other than, again, maybe the Huntmaster slot in Jund, but she could certainly show up, and the power level's certainly there.
So what about her makes you believe that there could be some Modern applications there?
Well, the +1 on the overrun with Trample, +1/+1 and Trample to all your creatures, is potentially really good in the Zoo deck, mostly. Also has some applications in Jund, but for the most part in the Zoo deck, like, that puts her apart from Huntmaster in particular. Because if you're just making a wolf and like bolting things, then Huntmaster's probably a little better at that. But she's also, excuse me, harder to deal with than Huntmaster because she's a planeswalker, not a creature. You know, you can't. I guess you can bolt her, but you can't like terminate her, for instance.
Sure.
Path her, stuff like that. So it's hard to say whether she'll see play, but it's.
But if she'll see play, you think it's predominantly because of that overrun ability.
And her resilience.
And her resilience.
Yeah, those two things over a card like Huntmaster again.
Yeah. But she's got an uphill battle being able to see play over Huntmaster.
Absolutely.
Because we know what Huntmaster does.
Card's nuts.
The game.
Yeah, card's nuts. And Arlen Court is nuts too, but I think she's pretty obviously nuts in Standard, but time will tell whether she's nuts enough, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, next we've got another card that I personally am not really sure is going to see some play. That's Anguished Unmaking.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
Okay, Anguished Unmaking is like a card that I think is very needed in Modern for black-white decks. This could be one of the things that pushes Mardu or Abzan more into the fold than like Jumped for the mid-range decks. Like Mardu especially, I think really wants an effect like this because it lacks the green ways to deal with artifacts and enchantments. But it's just...
So you're not saying that you expect to see this card play over Maelstrom Pulse. You're saying that you'll see it played in decks that can't play Maelstrom Pulse.
Most likely. The 3 life is very relevant in Modern in a lot of cases. Not always, but a lot of cases. In Modern, Burn is a very real deck, Zoo is a very real deck. This is no surprise to anyone. And in the format after Twin was banned, but before Eldrazi was sort of known as a real deck, or like a really, really good deck, it was a lot of aggro decks. That's what the format was. It was Zoo, Burn, and like Elves/Collective Company decks, where most of the format, and Affinity. And those are decks where your life total really matters, and that's where the drawback could be very relevant. But, again, they just unbanned a bunch of control cards, and especially with Thopter Foundry, Anguished Unmaking is really good against a Thopter Foundry sort of a make deck. You gotta exile that sword, get it out of here, or the Thopter Foundry if that's more annoying at the time, or the Tezzeret if that's more annoying at the time.
Tezzeret, yeah.
And
so you could hit all the pieces in a deck that we suspect will probably see some decent play.
Yeah, at least at first while people try it out, and it'll probably I suspect it'll be good even after that. So like that's very relevant, and then again, it's just another. It's like you said, it's very comparable to Maelstrom Pulse and Jund or Abzan, and I think it'll definitely see play in Mardu, and the instant speed certainly could make it see play in Abzan as well over Maelstrom Pulse. It depends on how the format looks, whether the 3 life is worth instant speed. I think.
Fair enough.
Well, and the ability to hit multiple things with Maelstrom Pulse, which does come up.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good card for sure, and you know there might be some legacy implications there too. Being instant speed again is no joke, but Vindicate and Council's Judgment probably a little better. But
I would say that most legacy players would just say definitely better.
Most would probably, and they're probably right. But
they're probably right. Yeah.
But you know the fact that there's even a comparison there makes me feel strongly about this card. For
yeah. I agree. It's if we're even talking about could it be played in Legacy, then we definitely need to consider that it can see some play about it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Next we've got Prized Amalgam.
All right, and this was the card I was alluding to earlier, the other zombie treat that that deck could potentially get, and this card is one of the best cards in that deck if it becomes a thing. Just every time you get a Gravecaller or Bloodghast back, you can also get a 3/3. You don't have to pay any mana. You don't have to do anything special. You just get another 3/3.
You just get a 3/3.
That's potentially really good in Dredge even, because every time you get back a Bloodghast Icarid, or well, Icarid in Legacy of course, or Dread Return something, you get a 3/3. Like that's very relevant. You can set up more Dread Returns with it, or the first Dread Return even. Yeah, this card has a lot of playable applications in a lot of graveyard-based decks. It would be the best in the zombies deck that we were talking about earlier, if that's a real deck. But even if it's not, it might see play in Dredge, especially in Modern where they don't have Icarus, so they only have Bloodghast as a sort of recursive threat.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And getting a 3/3, getting anybody when you do something in the zombie deck, it obviously gives you the opportunity to sack another creature and get those Bloodghast or Blood Artist triggers.
Yeah.
Yep.
For sure, for sure. And just also just winning the fair way by putting into play like 2 Bloodcasts and 2 Prized Amalgams. How's Jund ever going to beat that? How's Blue-White Control ever going to beat that? Blue-White X Control. I guess Anger of the Gods if you have read, but
yeah, the fairway, getting free creatures when you cast creatures.
Yeah, and that's strong in Modern. We've seen the Life from the Loam Conflagrate Zombie Infestation Dredge decks pop up recently, and this could be played in that deck.
All right. Next, we're going to talk about my favorite card in the entire set.
Woo.
Probably not Modern playable, but I'm definitely going to try.
Yeah.
That's the Gitrog Monster.
Well, I think a lot of people would agree with you about it being their favorite card in the set. This card has been pretty hyped, and you can see why. The card is awesome. It's huge, it's sweet, it does a lot of cool things, and unfortunately it costs 5 mana, and there's no way to cheat it into play like the Amalgam or something from the graveyard, so 5's a lot, man.
It is.
That's pretty much the bottom line. There would have to be some sort of, and you were telling me about this earlier, Bob, there has to be some sort of modern version of like lands, like some Loam deck, but it doesn't quite fit in the Zombie Infestation Loam deck. Mm-hmm. So it would have to basically make its own archetype, and even then, with the acceleration available in Modern, you're probably casting the Gitrog Monster on like turn 4 at the earliest.
Yeah.
Now, if you, I mean maybe turn 3, but that's mostly a pipe dream. But even if you get him down, he needs to survive a turn to your upkeep so you can start doing things with Loam. But once you do that, it's super hard to lose.
Yeah.
So the potential's there, but my gut instinct tells me that it's a bit too slow for Modern, and getting, untapping with your giant dude on turn 4 is pretty hard sometimes.
But man, would that be fun.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Please try this. Don't get me wrong. I want to see this work. It pains me to play devil's advocate here, but
yeah.
Unfortunately, I think realistically, it's going to be pretty hard to make it work.
Yeah, realistically, it's probably just an EDH card.
Probably.
Yeah. All right, and then finally, we're going to talk about the last card here, Cryptolith Rite.
Now, I think this card is awful in Modern. I'm just going to be straight up. But it's generated a little bit of hype in various online forums. I've seen people suggesting it maybe in a Modern sort of Elves deck. Maybe you could build a tokens deck, or some deck that could take advantage, some creature deck that could take advantage of large amounts of mana. And for the most part, I think this card is very win more. And if you already have a ton of creatures in play, you probably don't need this to power out some like enormous thing. I don't even know what that would be. Like I've seen specifically in Elves, and I've played a lot of Elves, and that's where people seem to think it could end up in Modern, and I just want to sort of dispel any notions of that being a possibility. Like, there could be a world where that's a thing, but my thoughts are just along the lines of you're playing a collected company tribal deck, and you're diluting it by adding an enchantment. And that's just not... You're making your companies worse, and you're making every elf with elf synergies in your deck worse.
Now, what if we revisited the Beck and Call deck?
Okay, that deck has come back a little bit lately with really strong players like Josh Arlen and Matt Nass playing it at Grand Prix Detroit. Mm-hmm. The Cloudstone Courier Beck Call Elf combo deck, and that deck, first of all, I think is really fragile and very, very meta dependent even to begin with. But secondly, I think Cryptolith Rite is a bit too fancy for the deck, right? Even in the deck as it exists, it's just you would rather have a Heritage Root every time than this card. And Yeah, Heritage Druid dies easier than this card, but they're already going to bring in their artifact and enchantment hate for your Curios, and
Fair enough.
it's hard to imagine a world where this thing can get there in that deck. But an interesting place for this card, and this is the best fit for it in Modern, I think, is Intruder Alarm Elves, which also uses back call, which I've also played a little bit of, and I don't think this deck is good, and I don't think Cryptolitherite makes it good, but that's where it fits best if it fits anywhere, I think, because that card is pretty cool with Intruder Alarm.
All right. So, lots of things to think about.
For sure.
Lots of potential brewing. Up here at BC Comix, we play on Wednesdays and Fridays. So this is a great place for you to bring, your most recent brew and test it out with some really good people, some fun people that are also happen to be fairly decent at the game. Will here is up here every Wednesday and every Friday. So come on up, bring your brew, and test out with us. Have a great day, guys.
Take care.